action. So the challenge that faces us as federal regulators is that our laws are there to protect the resources of the nation by regulating the pests, but in the end it's really people that we impact. The risk that is greatest in this is that human beings are moving an article that contains the pest over long distances and allowing it to establish somewhere else. So here we are regulating a pest, but our interaction is mainly with people. So to contain that beetle within a regulated area, we find that always voluntary cooperation through education is much more enduring and leaves a better taste in people's mouths than someone with a badge telling you this is the way you need to operate. So our first priority is always outreach and education to try and help people understand and hope that they will follow the rules and the regulations voluntarily. Before we get into this, there's a couple of things that we need to understand about North American ash. That is the resource that we are trying to protect. And beyond ash, the place that ash holds in our ecosystems and in our urban scapes. So ash is really the victim in the scenario here. Ash is everywhere. Although the native distribution of ash is not throughout the entire nation, because of its hardiness in urban environments, it has been planted everywhere. In fact, when the Dutch elm disease took out a lot of the elm trees that were in our urban scapes, ash replaced them because it's hardy, it's salt tolerant, it's gypsy moth resistant. For a lot of reasons, it was widely planted, and so even where it doesn't occur naturally, it has been a tree of choice to plant in our landscapes. In the woodlot, as far as a manufacturing and milling tree, it's kind of a middle-class tree. It doesn't get the super high dollar that some of the maples and oaks may get, or walnuts, but it is used for some finer applications like flooring and shutters and furniture, but it's also used a lot in pallets and crane mats and dunnage, a little bit lower dollar applications for the wood. But I guess the point is that in one respect or another it's used by everybody, whether it's a landscape tree for you or whether or not it is something that it brings palletized cargo to the facility that you work at, or exports it. I think most of our lives are touched by ash, and also given that it is the preferred wood for baseball bats, and that is America's pastime, I think that it is one of those woods that is near and dear to all of us. All species of ash that exist in North America are attacked by emerald ash borer, and all of the horticultural cultivars. That means our native trees, the white ash, the green ash, the blue ash, the black ash, but even some of the imported ones, Manchurian ash, and many of the cultivars that try and get a little bit more fall color in their leaves, all of them are susceptible to emerald ash borer in some degree. Another problem with emerald ash borer is it is what we call a primary pest. That means that it kills even healthy trees. So it aggressively attacks trees and kills them in several years by cutting off the critical flow of water and nutrients. And you can see this tree here is in the stages of dying from emerald ash borer attack. And it's also important from a regulatory standpoint to understand that size is not really an issue. Dutch elm disease, if you're out and about, you will find that Dutch elm disease, most of the elms in the environment get to a certain size and then they become infested with the Dutch elm disease and die, but the size they get to usually allows for reproduction. So although we don't have the useful elm that we used to have, it hasn't completely died out in the environment. But because emerald ash borer will infest these very small nursery whips, and please use the pencil for size, that it's wiping out all of the ash. And this is very important for us from a regulatory standpoint in that we know that even a small nursery whip can move ash borer from one area to another. And just kind of a gee whiz picture for you. These are emerald ash borer galleries on a tree. Obviously, emerald ash borer left no part of this tree untouched. This is a very pernicious and very devastating, aggressive pest of ash. So what do we need to understand about emerald ash borer, the beetle, to look at the regulatory scenarios and what the concerns are? I think the most important thing to understand is that the larvae appear to have a variable life cycle. Sometimes they make it from egg to adult in 1 year, and sometimes it's 2 years, and it might even be longer than that in some circumstances. It's not completely understood why this is, but certainly some of it seems to be in areas where there's a very low level of the beetle. They take a 2-year life cycle. Some of it may also be climate related, maybe nutrient related, but that means that you could have emerald ash borer underneath the bark where it's not visible for 2 years. That means that people who are moving these products where emerald ash borer might be under the bark wouldn't really know by looking at it, but from a regulatory standpoint it's significant, and we need to make sure those articles are maintained in an already infested area or treated. And researchers have recorded the adults emerging out of cut firewood up to 18 months after that wood has been cut. So there's quite a risk present with emerald ash borer hiding under the bark. So what is the regulatory work? What is it that we do? We have to define the regulatory landscape, and what that means is the state and federal officers that are working on this pest have to understand who handles regulated articles and who moves them in the area that they're working in. So what kind of mills do you have? What are the camping activities? Who might be the nurseries? How is the product moving? Who is it we need to talk to educate and to regulate? The inspectors also need to be responsible for facilitating trade where possible. Where people can do treatments or mitigate for the risk of emerald ash borer, then we need to put agreements in place to allow those people to operate and make sure that appropriate certificates and permits are issued to track that movement and facilitate trade. No matter how many people you educate, there will always be a small segment of the population that is willing to disregard the regulations. And for those, we need to conduct operations that target the ways in which they're spreading the pest to try and stop that movement for the good of ash in the nation at large. And then the officers also need to record and report violations as appropriate. And always an incredibly vital part of our job is outreach and education. Every interaction we have with another person is valued as an opportunity to educate them and talk about the program. The regulated articles, what are they? The federal regulations do not allow the movement outside of a quarantined area without treatment of emerald ash borer itself, hardwood firewood, that is non-coniferous firewood. And the reason the regulation was made at the level of hardwood firewood is that regulations are created for everybody in the nation, and although someone in the wood industry may be very savvy and be able to look at a bundle or a truckload of firewood where some of the bark is missing and some is not, and it's mixed load, and tell if there's any ash in there, that's certainly not true of the entire population. And also from a standpoint of being able to do inspections of that material, to bust open loads and look at every single piece would be a burden for facilitating the movement. So the regulation was set at all hardwood firewood. Then of the genus Fraxinus, which is the genus to which all ash belong in North America, all true ash, nursery stock is regulated. Chips are regulated, whether they're composted or uncomposted. Green lumber is regulated. Any other material, living, dead, cut, or fallen, including logs, stumps, roots, or branches, these basically any untreated ash material. And then if there were some item that we found that presented a risk, we would have to notify the person, and then we would regulate that article. So these articles cannot be moved out of the regulated area without either treatment, mitigation, or some kind of certification from a regulatory agency. This is a map, March 1, 2010 map, shows the current regulated area. The blue outline is those areas which are federally regulated, and then the white and yellow and brown are areas which states have their own internal regulations regarding. Any movement across a state line is regulated by the federal government, and if the movement is within the state, say in Illinois, if it moves from the white area to the green area of Illinois, that is regulated by the state of Illinois. So who's impacted by this? Well, certainly the nursery industry, the ash nursery stock, and municipalities, anyone who wants to plant ash. The logging industry, these are the folks that move the logs to the mills or to the processing plants, move veneer logs for export. Milling and manufacturing, anyone who handles ash to make it into a product such as a tool handle, green lumber itself, planters for rustic planters. We've even seen goat milking stands that are made out of green ash. So anyone who's using green ash and making it into a product. WPM stands for wood packing material. That's the wood packing material industry. That is your pallets, your crane mats, your dunnage, bollards, any skids, anything that is used to move cargo, associated with cargo movement. The wood byproduct industry, we consider that chips for biofuel, paper mills, and also the very large landscape chip and mulch industry, if they use ash chips. The firewood industry and the general public, the firewood can be the commercial producers and brokers, or it can be the mom and pop operations that operate seasonally or have a very small radius of sales. And then there's a lot of non-commercial movement, which would be me going on a camping trip and taking firewood with me. And also we have a significant stakeholder impacted in this in our Native American partners. Black ash is a very valuable resource to them, both culturally and economically, for the art of basket making. And as emerald ash borer impacts black ash as well as other ash, this is something that is very important to the Native American community. So that's a lot of impact. We look at the pathways of spread of the pest, and this is just a couple of examples. We know that a lot of logs move by rail. We also know that a lot of pulpwood moves by rail. And we've seen land clearing operations where a lot of people will, when they're doing large land clearing, the stumps and other debris that is being removed may travel by rail to, say, a biofuel plant for chipping and burning. So that's of interest to us. In the Midwest, certainly, and maybe other areas, there's a lot of farm auctions, and we know that in the fall they tend to sell lots of firewood at these farm auctions, and someone might come from 50 to 100 miles away to bring in a lot of firewood, and then someone who buys it may move it another 50 miles. So this can be a way for the pest to move. Here in the Great Lakes area, we have ferries that go to islands and across some of the lakes between various states. And some of the ferries allow vehicles to come on board, and if those are recreational vehicles, they may be taking firewood with them on their vacation. And perhaps, of course, the biggest is man moving firewood just in a vehicle to go camping. So these are just some of the pathways that we look at when we come in to regulate an article. How does the article spread? When we do a pathway analysis, what we do is we try and look at one of these modes of movement, and this is a map that represents a small-scale railroad analysis in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and all of the green squares are areas where there are rail sidings. There's a picture of a rail siding in the top corner. Those are logs that are waiting to be picked up. A train appears one day, the logs are loaded, and the train takes off. And then the red triangles are the destinations for the rail lines that move out of the Upper Peninsula. And as you will see, there's a potential for log movement to go all the way into Maine, Canada, Ohio, Minnesota. And this particular analysis actually helped us to identify some spots to do some good education. There was a place in Minnesota that was taking logs to be made into utility poles. The scary Maine location, they weren't even aware that they were receiving logs from Michigan. So it's a good way to increase our survey efforts and increase our education for people to be aware of emerald ash borer and look for that potential regulated movement. Regulatory work is really a matter of what I call tires on the tarmac. It is state and federal officers being out there looking around, talking to people, visiting mills. Every time they fill up their vehicle with gas, they look at the board there at the gas station to see if someone is selling firewood or has some kind of an auction that they might be interested in. They look at the newspaper, they look at the internet. But a lot of their finds when it deals with the timber industry come from driving around talking to the various people in the timber industry. The nursery industry, we do not have a treatment for emerald ash borer in nursery stock, and the only inspection that we can perform is to remove 100% of the bark to look for galleries. That generally doesn't leave a very good nursery item. And so basically, because no treatment exists, we don't have any mechanism to certify movement to come out of the quarantined area. And this is perhaps one of the highest risk items next to firewood because you have a live tree with a live emerald ash borer in it, and you're going to plant that tree. So you're providing a perfect place for emerald ash borer to live, mature, and come out and reinfest ash trees in the surrounding area. So it's a very high-risk item. I think it's interesting to note that although emerald ash borer occurs in southeastern Russia naturally, it was not known to occur in Moscow. Moscow imported a large number of green ash trees from the United States and Canada a couple of years ago, and now Moscow has emerald ash borer in the ash trees in Moscow, and it probably did come from North America, but that's a great example of how this pest can be spread in nursery stock. The logging industry is of course a huge player in this. Movement of ash logs out of the quarantined area can be facilitated by compliance agreements or limited permits which specify how you have to treat and move the material. The logging industry, we call them phantom loggers. They can be very difficult to find. Knowing where a logger lives doesn't do anything to tell you where that logger is operating, where he is moving material from, or where he's taking it to. So the best way for us to work on the logging industry is to work with the destination mills and try and work with them to understand their supplier list, who would be coming out of a regulated area, and have them notify us of any unauthorized shipments they receive. We've also found that partnering with the motor carrier enforcement divisions of state police has been very effective in some states in helping identify logging pathways and make contacts with loggers. We find that because it's such a big article and because of the cost of transportation, we call it a transportation limited item. We don't find that other than high dollar veneer logs, that logs move more than about 50 to 100 miles ahead of where the regulated boundary is. So if we concentrate on finding the destination mills in that 50 to 100 mile area just outside of the regulated boundary, then we have a pretty good handle on the movement within the logging industry. This is a shot of I believe it's Indiana Motor Carrier Enforcement working at one of their weigh stations, pulling in some logging trucks, talking to the drivers. The map shows just a week's worth of I think 2 weeks worth of data from the Indiana Motor Carrier Enforcement. It shows all of those red lines show the origin and destination of a log movement that went through Indiana in that time frame. And generally the longer lines are veneer logs. They are the ones that are of enough value to travel the really long distances. But as you can see, there's certainly a pathway there that we need to be aware of and interact in. The mills, the mill and manufacturing industry, we have agreements in place that allow these mills to continue to operate if they do a treatment. The treatments available to them are they can remove the bark and a ½ inch of the underlying wood, and then if they destroy the remaining bark, they have an article that can be certified. A certified article is free to move anywhere within the United States because the risk of emerald ash borer has been removed. For wood that is up to a maximum of 3 inches in thickness, they can kiln sterilize it. The alphanumeric code there refers to a treatment schedule which would give humidities and temperatures and durations that need to be met by the kiln. So these are your large kiln drying operations that'll move lumber into a kiln for a period of time to reach a certain temperature and moisture and then move out. Again, these articles are free to move anywhere. Fumigation, I'm not aware of anyone fumigating at this point, but it is a schedule on our books that allows someone to do a methyl bromide fumigation to kill emerald ash borer. There is a heat treatment available that is for logs and firewood only. The heat treatment requires an internal temperature. Therefore, probes have to be put into the wood during the treatment to measure the core temperature of the wood. It is currently 71.1 degrees centigrade for 75 minutes. We do see this being used quite a bit for firewood. Then ISPM stands for International Standard Phytosanitary Measure. 15, that is an international agreement for how wood packing material will be treated in trade. There is a special heat treatment for pallets and dunnage and materials that are used as packing material for trade that also will meet emerald ash borer requirements. And then we have a chipping protocol where if material is chipped to less than an inch in 2 dimensions, then it can be certified for movement as well. So this is a host of treatments that are available to the milling and manufacturing group that if they do these treatments under an agreement with us and we monitor the results, product can be certified to move feeling that the emerald ash borer risk has been mitigated. I think the hardest part about this is that there is some variance out there between regulations of federal and state, and sometimes the state regulations vary from the federal on what a treatment is or what has to be accomplished to move that article into that state, and that is a communication issue that we are working hard to try and help the public be fully aware. Wood byproduct industry, paper mills and the biofuel facilities. There is an extensive chip and mulch production industry, especially for landscape chipping in the quarantined area. As I said, chips can be chipped to less than an inch in 2 dimensions. There is also a composting treatment that requires turning of the compost pile and a core temperature on that allows a facility to move material and still be within the guidelines. So trade does not have to stop. The wood packing material industry, ash is a major component of hardwood pallets. The Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York area, that's a huge production of hardwood packing material in that area. So there's a lot of pallets produced. This is not near the high risk for EAB that nursery stock or firewood is. However, given the volume of the material that moved and the fact that we believe that is how emerald ash borer came into the United States, and that all of the international community has agreed that regulations need to be put in place to treat this wood packing material for safe movement, we do feel it is something of concern. APHIS and their stakeholders are in discussions on coming up with a domestic policy for wood packing material that would provide our own domestic states the protection of a treatment for wood packing material just like there is an international protection. And we have had several listening sessions where representatives of the agency have gone out and listened to the public, invited them to speak for the record on what they feel about having a domestic policy on this. It is not in place yet, but I believe it is in stages of formulation. Perhaps the biggest problem for us right now is that there is this huge reservoir of dead ash trees in the quarantined area. You have 13 states that have quarantines, and some of them are huge, and there's a lot of ash trees that are dying. So where do dead ash trees go? Because as you know now, EAB can live under the bark, not very visible to the public, for at least 18 months, if not longer. So there's a large risk here. Where do these trees go? Unfortunately, a lot of them go into firewood, especially the urban trees. Most mills don't want anything to do with an urban tree. If it's an urban tree, it generally has a lot of branching and it has metal in it, which is very hard on their saws. So they often go into firewood. Since all hardwood fire is regulated, we see that the four main modes of movement of firewood are by people just like you and I, and there is no logic to that. People will move firewood much further than the cost of transporting it makes when they could buy it at destination. We don't like to move without our firewood. There are the producers. These are the people that sell bulk firewood, generally for primary or secondary home heating, particularly in the northeastern part of the country. It tends to be somewhat transportation limited, but we have found that people out west where hardwood is a rare commodity, where they have a lot of softwoods, that they will come here to pick up firewood and move back west with them. Big box distribution. Any of you that have been in a big box store, which is like an Aldi's or a Kmart or a Walmart, Home Depot, they all sell firewood, and they broker firewood. They get it from a broker, and so that firewood can move quite a long ways. And there are always labeling issues with that firewood. Where did it come from? And then there's byproducts. Most mills have firewood as a byproduct, and it's cash and carry. You can drive up, and for a fee you can drive away with a truckload of firewood. Or many arborists that work within a community, firewood's a byproduct of their business as well. So these are the main ways that firewood moves, that we have to watch these pathways and try and intervene if it's moving out of the regulated area. There's been a lot of growing pains with firewood. We had huge policy inconsistencies between the various regulatory groups early on, and not only does this make it difficult for the public to understand what regulation any particular movement is under, but it's also very difficult to communicate responsibly to the public about their movements. We have made some ground in unifying some of these firewood policies. The non-commercial pathway, which is just general public movement, is not something that we've ever really had to deal with like we have with this pest, and we had to work to find some appropriate deterrents for the people that were moving firewood in non-commercial situations. It's also a whole new group of people to educate that perhaps haven't been APHIS stakeholders so much in the past. There's the camping holiday groups, the people who travel to NASCAR races, and any similar event like barbecue cook-offs, coon dog trials, hot air balloons, anything that brings people together where they might camp, bluegrass festivals, anything like that could be a venue to move the emerald ash borer. So we know that behind the line we need to educate people not to do it, but enforcement operations need to take place in front of the line where we don't want the emerald ash borer to spread. So we had to develop a number of operations that targeted the non-commercial public. The commercial movement is a little bit easier. Like I said, if for our other businesses, we do have compliance agreements in place that allow these people to continue to work if they can mitigate, if they can remove the bark and the underlying wood, or they can do a heat treatment, then we put them under an agreement and we allow their business to continue with monitoring. We do have many facilities that are approved to either treat the wood itself or they are allowed to distribute it. And when we allow distribution, it means that the wood is either treated or the wood comes from an area that it is not infested. It is safeguarded and appropriately labeled to be identifiable as not infested with EAB, and then they can distribute it out of their facility. So our compliance agreements are listed on the Plant Protection and Quarantine website that I've listed there below, and that website will come up again elsewhere in this presentation. This is just an example of how far this material can move with the commercial distributors. The orange kind of first base looking dot was a firewood dealer who had some infested emerald ash borer material that they packaged and distributed to Targets, Lowe's, Ace Hardware, and some distributors in Chicago that distributed to like 7-Eleven's, White Hen Pantries, the smaller gas and go shops. And then, so the large round circles were where the firewood went to be distributed, and then the squares are the retail locations that those distribution points service. So you can see it's a pretty graphic visual of how far firewood can move in a short amount of time given the distribution networks of our large big box stores. This particular one resulted in a recall, and all of the firewood came back except for less than 1 pallet of material. The big box stores and our state and federal cooperators in all of the affected areas worked together fantastically, and everything was brought back, but certainly the potential is there, and that's why we regulate these articles. Non-commercial, as I've said, this is the problem. The picture of the pickup truck and the boat, if you'll notice, in the pickup truck up in the front underneath his toolbox, there's firewood up there. That was actually crossing the Mackinac Bridge several years ago. The inspector, obviously, that is taking the toll would not be able to see that easily. These pictures were taken from the catwalk above the bridge, and state police were notified to go ahead and follow that vehicle and bring that firewood back. The middle picture is the road leading to Cedar Point in Ohio, where a firewood operation was conducted, and we did pick up a lot of firewood on that day that was moving beyond the quarantine. And in the upper corner is just a typical stack of personal use firewood. This is an older map, but I still think it's important. This is before, if you'll see the blue line in Ohio, you'll see what a small area of Ohio was quarantined at the time. The green dots in the state of Ohio represent campers coming to a state park in Ohio that are from a zip code that was infested with EAB. And the larger the green circle, the greater the number of campers that were going to that park. We use this kind of data to help us target operations. We would, of course, go to the parks that had the largest circles and look for people that were moving firewood, as well as try and do a lot of outreach and education. The Michigan portion of the map, as you go from light green to red, that shows you the number of people that came from that infested zip code, with red being the highest amount. And we've used maps like this all over the nation using reservation data from state parks and federal parks to help us try and figure out where our greatest risks are so that we can use our personnel and our resources the most efficiently. This is we call it an event map. The map was first generated by Forest Service. It represents the risk of introduction of EAB going from green to red, with red being the highest risk. And this is based on urban distribution of ash, native distribution of ash, people movement, ports of entry, Um, you can see through the upper Midwest, the Dakotas, and Nebraska, Kansas. Obviously, those little dots radiate out along highways, and they represent huge urban ash plantings. What's overlaid on top of that, the red squares and the blue, is the NASCAR circuit. We know that the NASCAR race at the Michigan International Speedway is followed the next week by the race in Bristol, Tennessee, which is right on the edge of the Smokies, which of course is a great national resource and treasure. And we have literally done operations at the Bristol racetrack and picked up a tremendous amount of people moving firewood that they picked up in Michigan at the Michigan race, and they carried it down to Bristol with them. So we recognize that these people events are things that we need to be keyed into and use to help mitigate the risk of spread of emerald ash borer. We found a load of firewood that actually left Canada, came into Michigan, went to the racetrack there, then went to Canada, then went to Bristol, and they violated the international emerald ash borer and gypsy moth violations, and then within the United States, both federal and state violations for both those pests. So, just using the NASCAR as an example, this is my plan to have the U.S. Department of Agriculture sponsor a NASCAR car that would have emerald ash borer on it and would have a slogan that says, "Don't move EAB at NASCAR speed." I haven't seen it happen yet, but just another way to get the word out there to reach these large-scale events. One of our operations for the Michigan International Speedway, this is very typical of what we see at the time. All of these small firewood vendors come out of the woodwork, if you will. And down at the end of their driveway, they'll have a sign that says "Firewood for sale," and just a can, and you leave your money and pick up your firewood and go. Well, that whole area was heavily infested with emerald ash borer, and a lot of the wood these people were picking up was infested. And sure, if they burned it or left it at the site in Michigan, there was no problem, but when they moved it beyond, then they were helping to move emerald ash borer to establish in a new area. They did some of my staff did a 30 by 60 mile square area on the roads that led into the race, and on a few days prior to the race they found what we call 42 event firewood sales. That would be like this mom and pop operation at the end of the driveway, and 21 were residential and 21 were business. So there's a lot of firewood that if you aren't looking, you may not be aware how much is out there being sold. Some of the larger scale operations, this is really more of an outreach operation. We will position ourselves at rest areas at strategic times on freeways when we think people may be moving from one place to another and carrying firewood, and we will try and educate them about emerald ash borer and pick up any firewood that might be a problem. This is a map of the Smokies and the area surrounding it, and all of those little red squares with tents on them are campgrounds in the area that we visited doing outreach and education about emerald ash borer, telling them what the risk was and trying to educate them and be helpful. Many of the people were not aware, and private owners of campgrounds were very concerned because they felt that their shade trees were a large part of the desire of their campground and did not want those shade trees harmed in any way by introduction of a pest. The roadside stops, this is something that we do in concert with state police, where we will actually stop vehicles and do kind of an enforcement action. But once again, it's really a great outreach and education opportunity because every motorist that we talk to, we try and encourage them to learn about emerald ash borer and be a part of the solution. One of our program aids is tattoos. We have these non-permanent tattoos of emerald ash borer, and much to my surprise, the age group that they are most popular with is the 18 to 25-year-olds. Boy, if you give them a tattoo, all of a sudden they're talking to you and want to know about what you're doing. So that was not quite what I expected, but we take every tool we can. And we also go out into the campgrounds themselves and talk to people to try and stop the movement. This is a farm auction. This is two pictures of the same farm auction in In Indiana, we find in a lot of the woodworking areas that we have a strong Amish and Mennonite groups that do a lot of woodworking, especially with wood packing material, and also a lot of firewood movement. And since they are not generally electronically connected, the best way to talk to them is to go to activities where they will be present to try and get the word out. So there are some special aspects to regulating. You have to understand who your stakeholders are. So it's not an easy job, but sometimes we get a little help. I thought you guys might like to know. This is a sign that tells someone that they're leaving an emerald ash borer regulated area and that they can't take firewood or ash material. And if you'll notice, there's a smaller sign that is attached below. And here is that sign. It says, especially firewood going to Perch Lake in a black Dodge truck with camper, and you know who you are. Well, we appreciate all the help that we can get in our regulatory efforts, and I hope certainly that this person saw the sign and stopped what they were doing, and we appreciate very much the help from the public. So a little bit about a compliance agreement. A compliance agreement is for if a business or an individual wants to continue doing business with a regulated article across a regulated boundary, and they can do a treatment or a mitigation, then they can enter into agreement with us. And that agreement is between the establishment and the government. It allows for the move of the article. It defines the acceptable treatments that need to be taken, and it includes a monitoring record-keeping scheme that goes along with permission to do that. And that's the main way in which we facilitate business in a regulatory program. Once again, as I told you, the templates for those basic agreements are available on our website. The two pictures here, the yellow machine is a debarking machine, and that is for debarking logs to be made into firewood. They remove the bark and a ½ inch of the underlying wood, which would then allow us to certify that material for movement. The other one is kind of unique. Those baskets up in the air get loaded with firewood, and then it moves into a kiln. And they move through the kiln for a period of time at a certain temperature, and then they come back out the other side and get loaded for distribution and sale. I think kind of like a dry cleaners. So these are both approved facilities to treat firewood. There are probes that go in for the heat treatment of the kiln wood. So just as a quick recap, our treatment methods that we allow are removal of all bark and a ½ inch of the underlying hardwood, a kiln drying treatment, there's a fumigation treatment, a heat treatment which is core temperature for logs and firewood only. There's the international treatment that allows wood packing material to move, which is also a heat treatment, chipping to less than 1 inch in 2 dimensions, and then there's mulching according to a composting schedule. This is not exact at any given moment, but as a general breakdown, it kind of gives you a good idea of the agreements that we hold by type. Almost half of our agreements are mill and manufacturing facilities, followed by the haulers and loggers that supply the logs to those milling and manufacturers. And then we're pretty close to equal on wood packing material, large kiln facilities, chips mulch manufacturers, and firewood handling. So that's just kind of a general breakdown of agreements. I think I've stressed, hopefully, quite a bit the strong link between regulatory and outreach. Education is always our first choice. We have there a number of kids sporting the EAB tattoos that was at a Future Farmers of America sponsored event in Springport, Michigan, where they educated every classroom in the school district about emerald ash borer, and then hosted a big party where the kids, the Conservation Corps, gave away a free conifer to everyone, and all of their school buses had our Don't Move Firewood magnets on them. It was a great event. The other picture is the grand entry at St. Ignace of some Native Americans who are our partners in trying to keep black ash as a viable resource for their culture. And we have a lot of regulatory information in packets. There's a tremendous amount on the emeraldashborer.info website that this webinar is hosted through. But we're always trying to be available to do meetings and presentations or send people at no cost to them DVDs or ID cards, pamphlets, anything we can to spread the word. I would like to point out that the picture in the bottom corner is actually the Deputy Administrator of the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service looking at a tree for emerald ash borer, so actually hands-on in the field, understanding how the program works. And I guess kind of in closing up, this is not how I want my landscape to look. I don't care how well you try and hide that cell phone tower. It certainly doesn't fit in with the rest of the trees, and I know it's not real. I would like to see real trees maintained in our landscape, including ash. So unless you want that to be your future landscape options, then we would like to work with you to keep EAB out of your state, your forest, and your town. And this is a homeowner whose tree has been marked with the pink dot of death to be removed as an infested ash tree. And we know that trees are extremely personal, and this is what we're trying to prevent. And so I think at that point that concludes my presentation. Available to answer questions.
Liz?
Yes. Yes.
We do have a couple of questions. Jim Walla asked if a non-quarantine state can require compliance agreements for movement of firewood into their state.
Not federal. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
They cannot require
it federally.
We cannot require that a non-regulated
article
be under compliance if it's not moving out of a regulated area. Thanks. I was having a hard time with the echo there. So if the firewood does not originate from inside of a regulated area, then there is no ability for us to put them under compliance. The USDA is working on a domestic policy for firewood that hopefully will make some options, some labeling options available to producers nationwide to be able to designate their product as healthy or clean or not coming from infested areas, but nothing is in place yet. Does that answer?
Yep, thanks. Sorry about the echo there. I have one other question. Are there ash trees that are not infested and inspected? Can they be moved by loggers?
Not out of a regulated area. As I tried to point out earlier, the difficulty of having emerald ash borer underneath the bark, or potentially even eggs on the bark that it's impossible to detect. You cannot do an inspection on a ash article and say, oh, it's free of emerald ash borer. It either has to undergo treatment, or it has to come from an area where emerald ash borer is not known to occur. So there would be no ability to look at a log and inspect it and say, oh yeah, it's good to go.
Okay, Liz, maybe you can see your screen, your chat. Jim Walla is asking another question as well about, since it says history is known that EAB is beyond the quarantine zone, why not increase the quarantine zone to larger areas around known infestations?
Okay, I'll try and take the questions as they come up on the screen now. Part of the problem was that emerald ash borer, unfortunately, was here for quite a while before we knew it. The same problem that we're having developing a good trap to determine emerald ash borer probably deterred its early detection in the country. And so the movement of emerald ash borer, a lot of the movement occurred before regulations went in place, and we are really hoping that at this point in time the quarantine boundaries are a pretty good reflection of where it is. We know that there are probably a few more outliers out there that were moved by man that we're not aware of, but the area of general spread naturally and the movement of logs and firewood that falls within that 150 to 200 mile area, we think we have that pretty well determined at this point in time. We did do that. If you'll notice, in Illinois and Indiana and Ohio, the federal quarantine is the entire state, and nothing can leave those states without being mitigated for emerald ash borer. But the number of counties that are actually infested, are known to be infested, are not the same as the federal quarantine. So we have tried to incorporate taking a larger chunk under the regulatory scheme because of the difficulties in finding the pest and because it had been here for so long before we knew it. Randy, I see you're asking, if a Pennsylvania person is selling firewood and not in a quarantine area, must they have a compliance permit if the wood is to remain local? You have to check Pennsylvania requirements on that. I believe that the state of Pennsylvania has some requirements on movement of firewood for the entire state. For the federal portion of it, if they're moving it within the federally quarantined area and within the state quarantined area, I know federally that they do not, but I can't answer for all the state requirements. But within the federal quarantine, as long as you're not crossing a state line and you maintain within the quarantined area, you should be able to move. The question is, how well does fumigating our trees help to reduce our risks? I'm not sure that anyone is fumigating the trees. I know that there are soil drench and tree injections going on. It looks at this point that some of them are actually getting to be quite effective, and I believe the emeraldashborer.info website has material on that, and they are doing for trees that are of high value to you and are in locations that can be treated. It looks like those pesticide treatments are really a viable option, but I'm not aware of anyone fumigating standing trees. I hope that answers the question. Okay, Janet, even if it comes from an area not known to have EAB, if it can survive undetected for 3 years, nobody really knows that it's not infested. Technically, yes. We have had a national trapping scheme go on for, it'll be coming up on its 3rd year, and done a lot of education and outreach. So you are correct, but we believe that we're doing the best that we can do at this point to really get people aware of the risks, and a lot of our referrals come in from the public. So if we have a national trapping scheme in place, then we're hoping that we can, like I said, we're hoping that the regulatory boundaries are pretty close to accurate at this time. Okay, I see the website got posted for you. Yes, there are many people working on a natural, well, not predator. There are what we call parasitoids, which are small wasps that lay their eggs in the EAB larvae, and then those larvae eat the emerald ash borer up and and kill it. Actually here in Brighton there is a facility that is raising 3 parasitoids that have already been released in the environment on a research basis, and we're trying to get up to a level where we can release those from a program standpoint. And one second here, there we go. Where we will be able to have predators in the environment that can maintain emerald ash borer at non-lethal levels for ash trees. In their native environment of China, that is how it works, except in times of extreme high stress to the trees. The parasitoids are able to maintain a better balance, and the emerald ash borer, although present, is not present in numbers that kill every ash tree in the environment. Laura, will movement between states become deregulated as contiguous states become infested? I believe that over time we will see that as the area that is infested increases, that we will eventually rewrite the quarantine to allow free movement within the entire quarantined area. At this point in time, the cost of emerald ash borer to any community that gets it is so huge that we really are buying time and being the most restrictive that we can, so that some of these pesticide research and some of the parasitoid rearing and the other options that may present themselves to manage this pest reasonably and cost effectively come on the scene. And maybe once those are a little bit more available to the general public and to municipalities, then they may look at restricting some of the regulatory movement parameters. Jim, you say the hope of APHIS is not comforting, given their lack of success in reducing EAB movement. If APHIS cannot handle the task, why not allow states to protect themselves? Well, states have the ability to have quarantines for emerald ash borer, and they do run them. As you can see in the maps, there are state quarantines in place in the infested areas. There are a lot of states that have put policies in place on public land for firewood, and I believe there is also a program that is available that if a state can show that the actions they're taking are strong enough and the risk is great enough, where they can have some legal recourse to the kind of action that you're talking about. So I think that ability is there, in partnership with APHIS or on their own. So Pam, yes, you are missing .shtml. So after the regulatory should be a .shtml. Okay, are there any other questions? Thanks. I enjoyed being able to present this information. Brent, like I said, try the emeraldashborer.info website, but as I understand it and as I have seen the results, they are getting some very, very good control with triage and imidacloprid products, and I think with the triage they are getting multi-year control. So I think there's some real positive hope for trees that are of high value in the landscape.
Okay, we've got just a couple minutes, so if you've got any questions, you've got about a minute or so, and then we're going to let Liz get some lunch.
Craig, I don't have any information on that subject. Um, Deb, the fumigation works quite well. For It's usually for material that's already cut into boards, and or we actually do whole log fumigations. In fact, it is required for a number of countries to fumigate logs before they move for veneer purposes, and those always are bark on. So the fumigation treatment is quite effective, but it is costly and is generally reserved for high dollar value product. Steve, if you want to request some of our information for public distribution, you can call our office here. The number is 810-844-2700, and Sharon Lucic, that's Lucick, is our public affairs person. If you just ask for her, she will be happy to send you whatever it is that we have at no charge to you. Deb, we encourage every state that is involved in EAB regulation to produce packets to hand out. We call them regulatory info packets, and they are targeted more toward industry. They usually have general EAB information and then maps and contact information and templates of compliance agreements. So it's really best to work locally for that, so it's applicable within your area.